senior fellow at the Heritage Institution and has also himself written books, including his most recent, American Restoration: How Faith, Family, and Personal Sacrifice Can Heal Our Nation. Please help me welcome Timothy Goeglein.
Good morning, everyone. Wasn't that a wonderful set of remarks from our new favorite bishop? Wasn't that terrific? I must tell you, living out of suitcases and on airplanes is kind of a downside, but the upside is you never know who you're going to meet. And I was in Latin America a week ago today, and was having a remarkable conversation with Cardinal Mueller of Mainz. And we don't, of course, agree on everything, but one of the remarkable things that he was sharing with me is that his mother, as a girl growing up in southern Germany, would pop on the radio and listen to Hitler screaming into the radio. And it wasn't just a remarkable thing when his mother said, I felt like I was listening to, one of the minions of the devil. But, to people in that part of the world, this is very current history. So on one Saturday in Latin America, I'm meeting a cardinal in the Roman Church whose mother listened to Adolf Hitler on the radio as a young girl. And on the opposite Saturday, I'm in beautiful Michigan, listening to my new favorite bishop recount not 14 generations apart from it, but one generation apart from it, the direct impact of Lenin. It reminds us of two things, doesn't it? One, we are a very young country. And two, anybody who says to himself or herself, it can't happen here, isn't paying attention. By the way, Pastor Toma, I was very pleased to walk into your beautiful gymnasium and to look there, Soli Deo Gloria, but to look over here and to see that, oh gosh, how contraire. You still have a sign that says boys' locker room. And presumably over here you have girls' locker room. Tisk, tisk. I have just flown in from Washington this morning, otherwise known as 68 square miles surrounded by reality. When I landed in beautiful Michigan, I thought to myself, it is so great to be back in America again. I could just smell freedom when I got off of the airplane. And it's wonderful to be back with you and to, if I may, just for a bit of our time together, help to demystify the swamp, which is never easy to do. By the way, I also know that I'm in Michigan, otherwise known as the center of the universe, because you all have these remarkable elections coming up. I was just meeting one of your great senators. May 1,000 flowers bloom for her forever. We at Focus on the Family are paying great attention to what's coming up. I am honor-bound, before I begin, to pay a great tribute to Chris Toma. I was scratching the following out on a napkin this morning on the airplane. I wanted to distill Chris Toma if I could, and I hope that some of you, nay, all of you, will agree with me that this is somewhat apt. A man of action who knows how to make muscle great ideas into action. A man of good deeds and a man, quote, unquote, who helps to fortify the timid. Do you like that? I think that's right. He's also my brother in Christ who understands that virtue is the soul of our constitutional republic. Now, I want to take a step back before we have our time together to assert the following. In the 1930s, the left began its mischief in Washington, D.C., by successfully beginning to reinterpret the United States Constitution and to do something very successfully. They began to pay more attention to Supreme Court nominees who would become justices. Now, the irony of what I'm sharing with you is that the only person elected 4 times to the presidency, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, tried to pack the United States Supreme Court. Remember, for all the greatness of the Constitution, it does not say how many justices we may have. So across our young history, we've had 5, obviously we've had 9, and the left, when you hear them talking about reform, in air quotation marks, reforming the Constitution, right, with the wink and a nod, what that means is expansion. They're very good at expansion. And they are bound and determined to reform the Constitution and to expand the Supreme Court. And I want to put into brass tacks how close they are to doing this. I mentioned the midterm elections a moment ago. I'm an inveterate hopefulist. I am an optimist to the core, I promise. Christ is risen. Hallelujah. But if the Democrats, the progressives, if they win the House again, and if they win the Senate by just a few votes, I'm raising my right hand. The first thing they will do is to abolish the filibuster. Filibuster is a fancy way of saying that you need 60 votes in the United States Senate to pass any legislation. Their goal is to abolish the filibuster, make every single vote a simple majority, and begin to do the following: to make Puerto Rico a state, to make the District of Columbia a state, and to expand, at least at the beginning, by 3 seats and up to 5 seats, the United States Supreme Court. I want to go back to the 30s for a minute. By God's grace, Franklin Roosevelt was unsuccessful at packing the United States Supreme Court. It backfired. But, and this is, I think, extremely important, the Democratic Party has never, ever stopped being in love with the idea of expanding the court. But here's a rabbit trail. And please stay with me, because this rabbit trail really matters. Dwight David Eisenhower was a really great general, but he was a middling president, really middling. He was asked after 2 terms as our president, "Do you have any regrets?" And he said, "I have 2 of them. They are sitting on the Supreme Court." Now, I'm very sorry to come to Michigan to give you the following news if you didn't know. Eisenhower, when running for president, made a quid pro quo. He feared that there would be a contested Republican primary against the then very popular governor of California, Earl Warren. Eisenhower did not want to run against Earl Warren. So they made a deal, kind of like a game show. They said the following: if Warren would not run for the Republican presidential primary and Eisenhower won, that then President Eisenhower would nominate Earl Warren as his first choice to the Supreme Court. Bad idea. In fact, it was like nominating the Titanic to be the Chief Justice of the United States of America. Because Eisenhower won, he kept his promise, and the Earl Warren Court, for everything that we believe as Christians, was beyond a disaster. Let me interpret this another way. All of those busy as a bumblebee progressives in the teens, 20s, and 30s who wanted to transform the United States of America by, in part, making our highest court in the land a second legislature, finally succeeded under a Republican president. Most of you are sitting down, but I will share the following: that on the most bitterly contested social Supreme Court cases of our lifetimes, in the 60s, in the 70s, and in the 80s, it was overwhelmingly Republican members of the United States Supreme Court who voted against our values. That should shock and sober us. As the second President of the United States, John Adams, famously said, and I quote him, "Facts are stubborn things." Yes, they are. So here we have arrived in 2022. We're awfully patient as constitutionalists. And finally, praise God Almighty, Providence cleared his throat. Because after 1973, by the way, did you know that the author of Roe against Wade, I'll say this again, did you know the author of Roe against Wade was a Republican? Did you know that Roe against Wade was argued not once but twice? The Supreme Court heard the case, and the Chief Justice, also a Republican, said, "Gosh, this is bigger than I thought. Maybe we ought to hear it with a full Supreme Court." There were 2 vacancies, so they heard it all again. There were only 2 dissenters, by the way. It was a 7-2 decision. And only one of the 2, that's 50%, was a Republican. The great William Rehnquist, who Ronald Reagan would eventually elevate to Chief Justice of the United States. The other dissenter was Byron White, who had come onto the court, nominated and confirmed by John Kennedy. By the way, Byron White, in his illustrious Supreme Court term, voted 3 times against abortion. I recently reread his 3 dissents. They are magnificent. And I may say, this side of eternity, they are prophetic. Why do we know this? So here we stand on a beautiful October morning in our beloved country. From 1973 until 2022, 68 million abortions in the United States of America. We have to let that hang out there just for a little bit. Wow. Given to us, by the way, by 7 unelected lawyers. It's a crime against humanity. Now, with that as a template, we arrive to one of the greatest days in our constitutional republic. I will never forget it, and I hope you won't either. By the way, I'm 58 years old. I was born January 6, 1964. And in my lifetime, I will never forget where I was on 9/11, and I will never forget where I was for the moon shot, and I will never forget where I was when I learned that the Supreme Court had overturned Roe against Wade. But here's the problem, and principally why I've come to this wonderful microphone today. Because the left is always for something until they're against it. That's a direct result of moral relativism, which is the catnip of American progressives. They are ultimately driven by a theology of nihilism. Do you remember that scene in The Wizard of Oz when they knock on the Tin Man? You're right, he's hollow, and so are they. But their ideas are not. Their ideas are like being invited to drink a cup of poison. Liberals, by and large, don't start things, they overtake them and ruin them. And they're very good at it. So of a sudden, by the snapshot of history, the Supreme Court is their baby doll, until it's not their baby doll. You see, the left has a proprietary sense that they own the Supreme Court. I want to drill down on that for a minute. The left believes that they own the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And therefore, when they get up one morning, and in one term they lose not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 major religious liberty cases, this is one term. They lost 4 religious liberty cases, and they lost Roe against Wade, which is the heart of their theology. Can you imagine arriving at your church and being told that you could not take the sacraments? That's how they feel. They have been denied the federal imposition to take away and to snuff out the lives of the innocent preborn. This is the fuel in their engines. How could this happen? I mean, in the teens and 20s, culminating in the 30s, 40s, all the way down to a Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, the party that freed the slaves, that had become pro-abortion, just like the Democratic Party. I mean, didn't they own both the parties? What happened? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. Better ideas. A rediscovery of the basic idea that the words of the Constitution have a fixed meaning. We know what a boy is, and we know what a girl is. We know who God is, and as we heard in those wonderful set of remarks, we know truth. We know truth not from haughtiness or from arrogance or from a sense of proprietary viewing of this concept and a basic idea. We understand truth because Christ came. And the most elemental sense of this gathering, the golden thread, is that if you want liberty and freedom over time, you better preoccupy yourself with virtue. And virtue is born of moral excellence. This is what makes America, America. So now, we are in another major battle. And the major battle is, do progressives own the United States Supreme Court, or do the American people? You know, this is not Hollywood's country, although they think it is. Just ask. This is not Silicon Valley's country, and this is not Wall Street's country. This is not a country that is owned by the swamp. This is your country. By the way, that is not a statement of populism. That's a statement of our founding. And we have to go tell a new generation. Remember that great anti-communist George Orwell famously said that the first duty of an intelligent person is to restate the obvious. We have to go tell a new generation the story of the United States of America. We have to tell this generation about the United States Constitution and the rule of law. We have to teach them about mothers and fathers. We have to teach them about the idea that a healthy community is rooted in the living, the dead, and the yet to be born. And that this cycle of life, this Burkean cycle of life, is one of the great gifts to us, anchored ultimately in religious liberty and the rights of conscience. Don't take my word for it. Guess what's brewing? A frontal assault, not only on American Christianity, but a frontal assault on American Lutheran Christianity. By the way, it's not a coincidence at all that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has been the subject of 4 major Supreme Court cases in the last 20 years, and guess what? 2 more are brewing, and they both involve schools. I'll say for the 3rd time in one set of remarks, this is not a coincidence. The Baltimore Lutheran High School Association and the Wisconsin Lutheran High School in Milwaukee, as we meet this morning, they are both subjects of major lawsuits rooted in the concept that they are showing bad constitutional manners by practicing their religious liberty. I go back to the comments a little earlier this morning. Just because as Christians living in America, we've always had religious freedom, doesn't mean that it shall always be so. We at Focus on the Family and many of our allied and partner groups, I promise you, we are working overtime on a host of issues, none more so, more important than the ongoing attack on religious liberty and conscience rights. And may I share, the great Lincoln said, you can't just say it, you have to demonstrate it. He was a Euclidean. So I'm going to demonstrate for you what I mean in brass tacks. How many of you here are business owners, or perhaps from a family that started or owned a business? Okay, me too. My best friend is my father, who's 85 years old, and he started a business after he got out of the Navy. I want to tell you a story about a remarkable American called Lorie Smith. That's really her name, by the way. Yeah, with a name like Goeglein, I wonder, are there any others, you know? But she's really Lorie Smith. And she's an artist. And she's a really good artist. But to make money, she designs websites, and boy, are they great. Her company in the Denver suburbs is called 303 Design. You have to learn about Lorie Smith and learn about 303 Design, because her case is going to the Supreme Court in just a few months. By the way, Lorie is our sister in Christ, a truly patriotic American, and a person who really prefers never to be on anybody's radar scope. In other words, she's normal. But government has told her in Colorado that if she wants to be in the web design business, and any of her clients happen to be people of the same sex and want to be married, that she is compelled to be a part of their wedding. Now, Lorie has made it very clear that she has and has had many LGBTQ plus clients. This is 21st century America, okay? Lorie has not a lick of animosity about her, none. She's a genuinely humble, remarkable person who believes that from her conscience, government cannot compel her to be a part of something that God says is in opposition to her faith. Now, it just so happens she's in the same state as Jack Phillips. Do you know Jack Phillips? Do you know that name? Right. For 14 years, government has been telling him that he must be compelled to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. By the way, he's the subject of another lawsuit. You may know this, that he's now being told that he must be compelled to bake a cake for a transition ceremony. Right, what's a transition ceremony? Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is where we're at. By the way, you know, this is Orwellian in the United States of America. And it's one thing as conservatives for us to whistle in the wind. May I tell you what whistling in the wind is? It's watching the evening news, being angry, and turning off the TV and doing nothing about it. That's what progressives expect of conservatives. Complain, yell, talk to like-minded people. Don't ever tiptoe into the public square. Shh. That's what the left wants. I'll say it another way. They depend upon the apathy of conservatives. Yeah, there's a lot of people shaking yes, because we know that this is where we have arrived. Let me translate. Here's what it means. Please sit down and be quiet. Guess what? We are undergoing a parental rebellion in this country, and people are being tired of being told to sit down and shut up. The reason I come to Heartland, Michigan and stand with my great brother Chris is because he is delightfully out of step with present-day liberal orthodoxy, and so should we be. Now, about that orthodoxy, if I may. When commentators and scholars on the left talk about democracy, they are generally not referring to a system of constitutional government in which the winners of elections form majorities to enact the changes they campaigned on. Oh no, that's very old-fashioned. We know that we are in a progressive era, that when the left does not get its way, it attacks you personally. And in the era of social media, that's very easy to do. You know, I was reading a tweet last week, and I thought I would put it in my vest pocket and bring it here. Here's what it said. It is almost as if young people are increasingly divorced from some foundational source for meaning and purpose in their lives that no amount of activism, money, therapy, or medication can replace. I think that's right. I'd like to translate that as well, if I may. Whoever wants the rising generation of young Americans is going to get them. And the other side has big plans. I'm raising my right hand for a second time. The left owns all of our cultural institutions. They own the universities and the colleges. They own the permanent bureaucracy. They own Hollywood. They own the public and most of the better private schools now. And they own many of our Christian colleges and universities. So they have made a determination that if they can own and run our institutions, that there's no place for the rest of us. But I think what we're learning is the following, that everybody is for that except for the people. So the largest historical question, the one that I raise here in Michigan, right, is who is going to prevail in that contest? By the way, I think the jury is out. I really do. Because we have to learn that as Christians who are privileged to live in this great country, that we are no longer the home team in our own nation. And in that reality, it means that we can no longer be comfortable Christians. This assumption that if my children are in public schools, that my children's teacher or principal or administrator, that they're probably in a church this Sunday as well, even if it's not my church. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Or that, this idea of in loco parentis, when my kids go away to college or university, that most of the administrators share my worldview, and therefore, right. It's very easy, it really is. It's very easy to think that it's just a matter of time. But my final comment is the following, that I believe that in moments of destruction, that there are also at the same time being planted seeds of renewal and restoration and regeneration. I believe that redemption is real. And I believe that if we as Christians have not completely internalized the reality of redemption, then we're missing the whole point of a really good story. You know, it's so tempting to say we've never been polarized like this. We've never been so divided. That's not true. In the American Revolution, 1/3 of all Americans were either opposed to the revolution or for the British. I'm not good at math, but 2/3 were on the other side. By the way, the Civil War, Michigan paid a big price in the Civil War. You sent lots of your sons into that charnel house. Do you know that in the Civil War in this country, we lost 750,000 Americans? That's called polarization and division. Today, by the way, is the 160th anniversary of Antietam, the worst single battle in the history of the United States. How many of our fellow Americans know what Antietam even is? What are the ramifications for a country of 350 million souls when we don't know our own history? That was a catalyzing day in all of the Civil War. And of course, the moral and the social revolution of the 1960s and 70s. My own uncle's name is on the Vietnam Wall in Washington. The political class led us into the Vietnam War. How did that work out? The Washington Post, the New York Times, CBS, NBC, ABC, they were all for the Vietnam War until they were against it. Being a progressive means that you never have to say you're sorry. I'll conclude, if I may, and I want to open it up with the following. I was reading this morning, and I've just concluded a wonderful little biography of a man I didn't know much about. Do you know the name Thomas Paine? He was a really extraordinary person by any objective measure. By his own measure, never perfect. Welcome to the club. He wrote the following: "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and the thanks of man and woman." He writes, "Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." He said, "What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly." Oh, isn't that true? "It is dearness only that gives everything its value." Oh, yes. He concludes by saying, writing, "Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods. And it would be strange indeed if so celestial a country like the United States of America should lose its freedom." So I think it is time that we put to bed the idea of the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot. We have a country, a culture, and a civilization to save. I remain a categorical and complete and total hopefulist. But boy, do we have our work cut out for us. And I'm happy on that note to answer or duck a few questions. Thank you all.
Yes. Just as anybody feel free to come up to the central mic. Just as a quick comment, in your opening remarks, you distilled Reverend Toma for us. But if you are familiar with his whiskey predilections, I'm sure he's done distilling of his own at some point.
Yes, I am.
Just a quick comment too. A pediatrician friend of mine recently indicated to me that Boston Children's Hospital in the last several days has come out and indicated that babies know that they're transgender from within the womb. And if you want to know the incredible logical inconsistencies of our ideologic opposition, that's an amazing accomplishment for a lifeless, non-sentient clump of cells. But anyway.
And if you would just tell me your name.
Aaron.
Aaron, nice to see you. I love the name Aaron for the following. Can you imagine Moses saying to God, I appreciate your invitation to me, God, but I have a speech impediment, right?
Yeah.
And God said, that's fine, I'll send you a press secretary. And his press secretary was Aaron.
Yeah, it was.
Yes,
Yep.
who I think was more effective than the present White House press secretary, don't you?
That's fair. So you talk about the deep state and this political class that's so entrenched in DC and so entrenched in our institutions. I remember President Trump ran on the platform of draining the swamp, and I think what he found in his first term is that the swamp is a lot harder to drain than we thought, and God willing, in a second term, he might be able to take it on more effectively. But I wanted to ask you, what can we do as ordinary citizens to fight against this monolith that controls all of our political and educational and media institutions, Hollywood, DC, everywhere?
So I love that question, and the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Okay. Now, to be very specific, politics does not lead. Culture leads. Politics follows culture. So the very, and I think most important answer to that great question is the following. What are we doing as Christians and conservatives to make culture? I'm very serious about this. Who among us are the screenwriters for great films? Who among us are the poets? Who among us are preparing the next generation to be the president of the University of Michigan? I'm not being clever here. The culture makers are the actual legislators of any civilization, because the word culture comes from cult, from spirit, and every great civilization is rooted in religion of some sort. So I believe it is very important, in fact, exceedingly important, that we not only get involved in politics and legal matters and all the things we've talked about today, and I know you're going to hear from Matt Walsh, so you'll hear a lot more, right? But I believe very directly we have got to train up and to be proactive and intentional of identifying in the rising generation of young Americans like you, right? And saying, how are we going to match the talent of this young person to the cultural need of our country? I'm going to use one example and then go to the next question. I call it the golden era of Hollywood, the films of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, okay? They don't preach at you. They simply lay out a worldview that is commodious with everything we believe, right? They hold up marriage. They hold up family. They hold up all the things that we believe about our nation, you know? And I think that we don't need to go back to something. I think we need to go forward to a culture, broadly speaking, of shared moral assumptions about the timeless, immutable first principles that make us a remarkable country. And you know what? I believe that we're heading in that direction. Yeah, thank you. Great question.
My name is Tim. You preemptively answered some of the question, but thinking about the fact that it's not enough to simply destroy, because we're not nihilists. We actually have to build something. We're not going to win a culture war if all we're trying to do is destroy someone else's culture. So I was wondering if you could elaborate some on what you would see as steps to take to build the sort of culture that makes a civilization worth living in.
Heart, I never thought I'd come to Heartland, Michigan and talk about Kanye West. How many of you saw him on Tucker Carlson? Wasn't he great? Here's what I mean. We have to, as Christians and conservatives, not embrace, but to become comfortable with parts of popular culture and a language of popular culture where many people are, and to be able to say, what can we do with that? It's very difficult because we feel sometimes like we're violating our principles, but we're not. We have to, to use the phrase of Ezra Pound, we have to make it new, right? Look, two of the greatest minds of the entire 20th century, and I mean the greatest minds, Clive Staples Lewis, otherwise known as C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay? What did they do? They wrote these remarkable books. Moral imagination versus the diabolical imagination, right? The painters who paint beautiful things versus ugly things. The poets who give us, the beautiful, the just, and the true over against the other worldview. I know I'm in your presence, and I keep referring to the former Soviet Union. Do you remember what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said? If you all forget everything I've said, and you probably will, please remember, I think, the greatest thing that Solzhenitsyn ever wrote. One word of truth will change the world. Yes, it will. And it begins, in my view, in the church and in culture.
Hi, I'm Lana. Thank you for being here and for your commentary. I wanted to read a tweet to you and have you opine. It is an advertisement for an opinion piece written by a gal who calls herself a professor and a theological expert. Here's MSNBC's tweet. It may seem harmless, but the insidious racism of the American religious right, oh gosh, my phone just turned off, of the American religious right's obsession with homeschooling speaks volumes. That's a quote out of the opinion piece, but that is also their advertisement for the piece. So I would like you to speak to that and education in general.
I'd be thrilled to do that. We are in the midst of a parental rebellion, which I mentioned a moment ago, okay? It's not because of COVID, by the way. COVID was a catalyzer and a crystallizer. We have to internalize three remarkable statistics. As I said to you previously when we were talking, anecdotes are not statistics, so let's use facts, all right? In the Chicago school system, 7% of their entire school population is no longer there because parents said enough. In the New York City schools, it's almost 10%. Parents have said, this is enough. The last time I checked, Chicago and New York were not conservative readouts, right? My guess is that if all of us could go meet those parents, there's a lot of things we wouldn't share in common, but the point that you're raising, we share in common. The schools are broken. But here's the bigger statistic. In 1993, in all of the United States, there were about 30,000 homeschooled families. Today, that number is over 3 million, and it's growing. Why is that? Right. because parents, left and right, right, have grown up and have said, that's not where I want my kids. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I live, we had a remarkable governor's race, okay? And a former governor, who happens to be Bill Clinton's best friend, wanted his job back. And he came to a debate and he said essentially to parents, butt out of education. The teachers, the administrator will take care of it. And you know what? The voters butted him out. Yeah. Do you remember Margaret Thatcher? Lady Thatcher, the great Thatcher, right? She said to George H.W. Bush the following. I think it was great advice. May I quote her? Don't go wobbly. This is a great message to all of us, right? Just when you think you're losing, you're not. Don't go wobbly. Just keep doing what you're doing. Thanks for your courage.
Good morning. My name's Mike. So I'm going to give you a long question with a lot to unpack. Recently, a representative of the AMA said, not only women have children, men have children too. I simply say that as an example. I'm reminded of a former pastor that I had that talked about the problem that we have today is one of language, and you spoke to language in one of your previous answers. What I'm specifically saying is change the language, change the culture, if you think about what Orwell said about language. And I wonder if you can talk just a little bit about how we can, I'm thinking about the frog in the pot of water. The frog boils to death because the change is so gradual, right? I think a liberal strategy is to change the language. And how can we keep ourselves cognizant of the language that's changing, and how can we impact that?
I really love that question. You know, it's not a coincidence. And again, I know where I'm standing. And by the way, I'm very privileged and honored to be standing here, right? It's not a coincidence that we as Christians refer to the Word, right? Why do we do that, right? The Word, not the words, right? The Word. It is considered bad manners in 21st century Western culture to actually believe in objective truth, right? That if I come to a microphone like this, I can tell you that I'm speaking on a Saturday morning as a man, or that I'm a dancing elephant, right? But I mean, ultimately, objective truth is the centerpiece of the whole project. And I don't want to sort of, you know, I want to resist the temptation to talk in talking points. But we have been warned, right, from the book of Genesis until the book of Revelation, that when you tell the truth, there's a price to be paid, right? So I want to conclude my time, if I may, with your question and what I hope to be the best illustration I could possibly give. May I do that? Okay. The great St. Paul. He goes to the height of intellectual achievement in the ancient world. Athens. What a city, right? In the whole of Western civilization, 3rd century Greece, right? 5th century Greece, 3rd century Rome, I mean, wow. And where does he go? He goes first to the marketplace. He's come to downtown Heartland. He goes to the hardware store. He goes to the marketplace. St. Paul goes to talk to real people, doesn't he? We're told that. Can you imagine opening up your hardware store and having St. Paul walk in the door? But, I mean, it's very clear from Scripture that's what happens. He's in the marketplace. He's among the people. He goes to the second place. Do you remember where it is? It's to the synagogues. It's to the temple of learning of the religious men of the day. And he does what we're doing this morning. Although I'm sure he's doing it in beautifully Socratic, right? But I'm intrigued by the third place he stops. Do you all remember this? He goes to Mars Hill. He goes to the height of the Areopagus. He goes to the place where Socrates himself, one of the three great Greek philosophers, was tried on the question of what? Truth. This is not a mistake, and it's not a coincidence. This is Providence himself working through St. Paul on the question of what is true. Now, lest we think in 21st century America, when a big moment for us is deciding the 1,500 types of coffee we'd like to have this morning, lest we think we have it tougher than St. Paul, we have to go tell the truth. And we have to do so even in that time frame where we face the show trial of Socrates. And here is the beautiful moment of hope and faith and restoration. We learn in that moment that many didn't believe, but some believed and some wanted to have more dialogue, didn't they? Yes. We will never change a country, culture, and civilization by putting our knuckle into somebody's chest. But if we establish a relationship, I believe over time they will hear us. And what a privilege and a blessing it is in our country to share the gospel of Jesus Christ and to share the good news in the Word. So I just think we have to trust and be hopeful and to know that, that better days are ahead for us. That's what I really believe, but we have to stay at it, right? Be of good cheer. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Wonderful.
I'm going to grab my papers here.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I hope